Good evening, everybody. Very nice to see you tonight. Good to see you rolling in. Evelyn, Ella, I hope you've finished your tea now. Barry, Marilyn, Sue, Moira, Bridget, Angie, Gail and Grace, Marie, Helen, Bernard and Katie. Brilliant to see you tonight. Thank you for joining me. It'd be proper lonely without you. If you want to be starting on thinking about the interactive little challenge tonight, we're thinking about something that might have stretched you, whether it's learning a new skill or it's some kind of activity or something to do with traveling. Could be something in your work, past or present. I'm not looking for deep dark revelations here. I'm just because I know that we all have those kind of things that stretch us, but so just practical things that we've maybe done or not even done that have stretched us. So maybe you want to jot those down in the chat. Sometimes people text me as well because they can't do the chat at the same time. Alan, evening by the way, and Andy, Beth, don't know if you're Alan and Karen. Alan, visiting the refugee camps was a real challenge and well outside the comfort zone. Yes, I'm sure that we recognise that, and other people have said similar things, haven't they, who've been able to go as well. So be having a think about that. I hope you've all had a good day. The weather improved, didn't it? Which was good. Managed to get out for a walk with lovely Kathy, and the best thing about it, well, it was just lovely, was we saw very close and for a prolonged period of time a barn owl. So we were just near Bank Newton, just outside Gargrave, and this barn owl flew across the road and down a little kind of valley that was there, and then it got chased by a crow and came back and flew around in the road with a crow diving on top of it in the road. Frustratingly, I didn't have a decent camera to capture it, but it must have been a good sort of 10 minutes or so of this beautiful, beautiful barn owl. I sound like I'm on Winter Watch, don't I? That's on at the same time, by the way, as this is tonight. So, challenges. Marilyn, learning to drive was the thing that stretched me most, very hard at 50. Could you please tell this to my children who are not very keen on the idea of learning to drive? Because I agree it's quite challenging. But well done for doing it at 50. Well done. Very impressive. Current challenge, doing a jigsaw Monet water lilies. Oh my goodness, Bernard and Katie, that is a super challenging one. I mean, it's all like, blurred all together, isn't it, as well? And lots of the same thing repeated. How big is it, Bernard? Gail, Grace, leading a church small group. Yeah, that can be really challenging, can't it? Not mentioning any small groups that I've ever led. They've all been perfect, of course. Gail, moving to Malawi with small children. I think that sounds like a challenge, like a proper challenge. So well done for doing that. Swimming in the River Wharf, Beth. Yes, it's quite cool at the moment, swimming in the wharf, isn't it? 1,000. Yeah, that's what we go for normally, about 1,000 pieces as well. Sue, learning to drive. Is that learning to drive in Nepal or just learning to drive full stop and then the trekking in Nepal? Yeah, I imagine that would be quite challenging as well. It's quite steep, isn't it, in Nepal? Moira, mastering Zoom. That's a great answer. That's a great answer. Great, some good challenges there. I'm trying to think. I just feel like I've had so many challenges in my life at varying descriptions, some more serious than others. I think... Roy and Vanessa, moving in a pandemic, that is a proper challenge. And then trying to get to know anyone, really a big challenge. Mike and I did whitewater rafting in Costa Rica a lot of years ago now. And it was level 4 to 5, which is the level they use for the Olympics. And I have to be honest and say, I just held on to the side whilst also paddling, as just desperate not to fall out. That was quite scary. That was quite a big challenge. Andy, singing in front of people a few years ago. Yeah, but you were fab, Andy, weren't you? You surprised everybody by how good you were. So it was definitely a worthwhile challenge for you to be doing that one. This is very interesting, hearing all your challenges. I'm having a look up the list, see who hasn't owned up to any challenges yet. Oh, there's a few of you. That's probably because you are so amazing that nothing is challenging to you. Judith, living in a little caravan for 13 months. Oh my goodness, that is a long time to be living in a little caravan. That is also a challenge. Andy's laughing at me saying that he is good at singing. He is good at singing, if you haven't heard him. Ella, Edinburgh Moonwalk. Oh my gosh, yeah, that was a long way in the night, wasn't it? I think doing anything in the night is a challenge, isn't it? Because everything about you wants to just go to sleep. Judith, is that a not falling out of the caravan or not falling out with the person that you were sharing the caravan with? Because, you know, it's quite easy to fall out of a caravan. Any others of you want to own up to any challenges? 10,000. Oh, hang on, I'm not good with numbers, Steve. It's not fair. 10,000 steps for 1,000 days. That's right, isn't it? Yeah, I mean, my word, what an impressive challenge, not just to take, but to complete and then keep on walking. Also, I loved your deer that you saw this morning. I don't know if you heard me talking about the barn owl we saw earlier on. I was out for a walk with Kathy. It was lovely to see the barn owl. It's just, in a way, when the leaves aren't on the trees in quite the same way, you can see a bit more actually when there's animals or birds around. You see them a little bit more clearly, don't you? So some good results here on the challenges. Even the first time I played the organ for a service, yeah. In fact, I mean, like the first time you do anything, which is kind of exposing, like playing a musical instrument or singing or anything like that, or speaking a new language that you've learned, maybe like having to stand at the front and speak it rather than just kind of, you know, muddle your way through in a conversation. Oh, great. Well done, Judith, for not falling out with each other in a caravan for 13 months. That's like properly impressive. Great. Well, I think that we pretty much all rolled in now, so we can make a start. Doing my tax return. Yeah, Mike's doing his at the moment, I think. Well, actually, maybe not quite at the moment, but I think he is trying to do it. He said it was very complicated this year as well. So we'll keep having a think about that, and if you think of something, you think, oh yeah, there was that, then you feel free to write it down at any point. It's fine. So the first week we were talking about having that intrinsic faith, kind of portable faith. So he and his friends grew up in Jerusalem, but it was the kind of faith that could actually be worked out in Babylon. Andy, don't abuse Peter Smith. It's not nice. And then the second week, we talked about having that double listening faith, where we listen to the culture and to the context, and also to the Lord at the same time. Those ancient stories are improvised in a new era. And interestingly, I didn't read this properly, but somebody was saying about name's gone completely out of my head. Amanda, was it, that did the spoken word thing yesterday at the Joe Biden's inauguration so amazingly? I mean, at 22, like, you know, I couldn't even stand up in front of anyone at 22 without falling apart. To be able to do that so amazingly, but the content of what she said, and somebody said exactly those words about taking some kind of real truths and ancient stories and improvising them in a new kind of medium that really connected, and my word, did it really connect with everybody who was listening. It's not often that poetry has the last word, is it? And tonight we're looking at elastic faith. And elastic means having a tendency to recover the original form or size, springy, able to recover quickly a former state of condition after a shock, flexible. And someone has described elastic faith as faith that is stretched but not broken by the trials of life. I'll say that again. Faith that is stretched but not broken by the trials of life. Yesterday night, I think it was yesterday night, or maybe the night before. Anyway, I watched a film that we have had here in our house for many years. It's called The Incredibles. It's a kind of, you know, animated type film. And for some reason or other, I had never watched it with the kids, which is very unusual. And so we thought, oh, well, we'll watch this film, The Incredibles, together. And I really recommend it. It was really fun. But one of the main characters is a superhero called Elastigirl. I know, it's a great name, isn't it? And things all go wrong, and all the superheroes have to kind of go under wraps, undercover. And so she has this normal life where she's married and she has 3 kids, and they just do a normal job, etc., etc. But and I won't spoil the movie for you, but then things kind of start breaking out and they need to kind of engage their powers again. And so she lives this normal life, but then in extreme situations she can stretch, and boy do I mean stretch. I mean like properly stretch in every dimension. And in her elasticity, she not only helps herself, but she also protects other people. So when something happens to their mode of transport, she turns herself into a parachute and manages to save her children, and they all float nicely to the ground. I mean, it's a useful thing, a useful skill to have, isn't it, to be able to stretch that much? So, you know, watch it. Rob Heskins says it's good as well. So have a watch of that, because it's all about this kind of stretchiness in extreme circumstances. And this is the elasticity, is the capacity to be stretched but not broken by the trials of life, is a mark of faith in exile, which is displayed by Daniel, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So this is kind of slightly random, but when I was leading worship on Sunday, I used these really familiar verses from Isaiah chapter 43. And so I'm going to read them to you again. For now, this is what the Lord says: He who created you, O Jacob, he who formed you, O Israel, fear not, for I have redeemed you. I have summoned you by name. You are mine. When you pass through the waters, I will be with you. When you pass through the rivers, they will not sweep over you. That's like a good promise for the moment in some parts of the country, isn't it? When you walk through the fire, you will not be burned. The flames will not set you ablaze. And it's like those kind of general words become real and specific in the experience of Daniel's three friends, don't they? As they face the genuine flames of Nebuchadnezzar's furnace. And their response has been for generations a touchstone for believers who face the terror of opposition and even death. And somebody wrote this: the clear assertion of the narrative of Daniel as the exile experience of all Israel is personified in the trials of a small group of young Hebrews, is that faith in Yahweh may not always bring deliverance from adversity, but it will always bring deliverance in adversity. And this story, if you like, is a graphic insight into the only kind of faith that's going to sustain us when the storms of life get beyond a teacup, when they actually start to frighten us. And Daniel and his friends are stretched across an enormous gulf between the affirmation that God can rescue them and the reality that he might not do so in the way that they so desperately seek. We're going to be looking more at these things. And their faith is not destroyed by adversity because it's elastic enough to embrace this great gulf, the most significant gap in the human experience of faith. And this is a faith that only surfaces when the unthinkable happens, when God allows us to walk through a valley that is deeper, longer, and darker than we could imagine. So, in this story, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are promoted with Daniel after just before this, the dream interpretation exploits. You'll remember Nebuchadnezzar promotes all of them to a place of prominence. And of course, that always brings its own complexities. I mean, you only have to look at the election stuff, don't you? As soon as you get, on your pedestal, everyone wants to throw things at you. And that's what they found: rivalries, jealousies. And of course, it sets them out in their distinctiveness as Hebrews as well. So there's probably a gap of several years between chapters 2 and 3, and maybe that might explain something of the king's attitude. So let's read it together, shall we? In fact, let's just pray a moment before we do that. Father, we thank you that we can meet together online like this and look at your word. And there's so many really important things in this story for us tonight. Things that are not just superficial, but that really touch the core of who we are and our faith in you. And so, Lord, we pray that you'd speak to us as we study this chapter together tonight. Amen. So let's read this together. I hope you've all got your Bibles to hand to try and get the light in a way that I can actually read the words. So, you ready? King Nebuchadnezzar made an image of gold 90 feet high and 9 feet wide and set it up in the plain of Dura in the province of Babylon. He then summoned the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all of the other provincial officials to come to the dedication of the image he had set up. So the satraps, prefects, governors, advisors, treasurers, judges, magistrates, and all the other provincial officials. Do you ever think these chapters would be a lot shorter if things weren't repeated? Assembled for the dedication of the image that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up, and they stood before it. Then the herald loudly proclaimed, "This is what you are commanded to do, O peoples, nations, and men of every language. As soon as you hear the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, you must fall down and worship the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar has set up. Whoever does not fall down and worship will immediately be thrown into a blazing furnace." Therefore, as soon as they heard the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, and all kinds of music, all the peoples, nations, and men of every language fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. At this time, some astrologers came forward and denounced the Jews. They said to King Nebuchadnezzar, "O king, live forever. You have issued a decree, O king, that everyone who hears the sound of the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes," could they not just say the band, "and all kinds of music must fall down and worship the image of gold, and that whoever does not fall down and worship will be thrown into a blazing furnace. But there are some Jews whom you have set over the affairs of the province of Babylon, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who pay no attention to you, O king. They neither serve your gods nor worship the image of gold you have set up." Furious with rage, Nebuchadnezzar summoned Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. So these men were brought before the king, and Nebuchadnezzar said to them, "Is it true, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, that you do not serve my gods or worship the image of gold I have set up? Now when you hear the sound of, all together now, the horn, flute, zither, lyre, harp, pipes, and all kinds of music, if you are ready to fall down and worship the image I made, very good. But if you do not worship it, you will be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace. Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego replied to the king, "O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he doesn't, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you've set up." Then Nebuchadnezzar was furious with Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and his attitude towards them changed. He ordered the furnace to be heated 7 times hotter than usual, and commanded some of the strongest soldiers in his army to tie up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and throw them into the blazing furnace. So these men, wearing their robes, trousers, turbans, and other clothes, were bound and thrown into the blazing furnace. The king's command was so urgent and the furnace so hot that the flames of the fire killed the soldiers who took up Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and these 3 men, firmly tied, fell into the blazing furnace. Then King Nebuchadnezzar leaped to his feet in amazement and asked his advisors, "Weren't there 3 men that we tied up and threw into the fire?" They replied, "Certainly, O king." He said, "Look, I see 4 men walking around in the fire, unbound and unharmed, and the 4th looks like a son of the gods." Nebuchadnezzar then approached the opening of the blazing furnace and shouted, "Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, servants of the Most High God, come out, come here." So Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego came out of the fire, and the satraps, prefects, governors, and royal advisers crowded round them. They saw that the fire had not harmed their bodies, nor was there a hair of their heads singed. Their robes were not scorched, and there was no smell of fire on them. Then Nebuchadnezzar said, "Praise be to the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who has sent his angel and rescued his servants. They trusted in him and defied the king's command and were willing to give up their lives rather than serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I decree that the people of any nation or language who say anything against the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego be cut into pieces and their houses be turned into piles of rubble, for no other God can save in this way." Then the king promoted Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in the province of Babylon. There we go. So, interesting story. We know it well, don't we? It's one of our better known stories from Daniel. And this is probably some kind of festival, and he's trying to think about how to bring the people together. Maybe he started mulling over that dream, the one that we were talking about last week, that Daniel knew that he'd had and interpreted it for him. And maybe he started thinking a little bit too much about the "you are the head of gold" aspect of the dream and started to fill his imagination with that. Perhaps he also started thinking about the fragility of the feet of iron and clay. And maybe he thought about how could he perhaps bring more social cohesion, which of course is a bit of a common pastime of dictators. How might he enforce social cohesion. And perhaps he could prevent disintegration with some kind of common religion, a common centre of worship. And again, it's really popular as a method of keeping control of people. We only need to think about the statues of Stalin that were put up across the Soviet Union. Or if we look to North Korea, we have statues of Kim Jong-il and Kim Il-sung, and they're about 66 feet tall. And it's this kind of sense that putting a statue up is a common place, and saying to people, you need to kind of, in effect, honor the statue, whether it's a worship of the statue or honoring of the statue. But it says, there is going to be no dispute about who's in charge here. And I looked up how tall some statues were, and the one that is literally head and shoulders above everybody else is Henan Spring Temple Buddha. You'd recognize it if you saw a picture of it, and it is 128 meters tall. Now, you will know the Statue of Liberty, and that is 93 meters tall, and that includes a 47-meter tall pedestal. So you imagine this Buddha is 128 meters tall. It's utterly huge. And then there's a statue in Volgograd in Russia called the Motherland Calls. It's like somebody with a sword in their hand, holding the sword up, and that's 85 meters tall. In Rio de Janeiro, the Christ the Redeemer statue is 39.6 meters tall. So, I mean, honestly, in this kind of silhouette that I can't show you, Christ the Redeemer looks absolutely minuscule compared to the other statues, and they look minuscule compared to this statue of the Buddha. So this is the kind of thing that we do, humans do, to make a point. And Nebuchadnezzar, maybe he just wasn't satisfied with being the head of gold, so he makes this golden statue, which is got from the head to the feet is 90 feet high, 30 meters tall, and only 9 feet wide. So it's really, really slim. It's almost like a needle kind of idea. Maybe it had a broad base, I don't know, to keep it balanced. We don't know about that. But you can imagine the amount of wealth required to make this statue, even if it's just gold on the outside, but if it's gold all the way through. And in fact, in the next chapter, we see God accusing him of abusing the poor for his own glory. And in this chapter, it's 4 times it says the image that Nebuchadnezzar set up. Very, very clear who is behind this. The might of Babylon, the majesty of King Nebuchadnezzar. And we see throughout Daniel this kind of, what's the word? It's like a roller coaster of faith. They're really, the kings, the leaders are really against God, then something happens, and then they go, oh yeah, your God's really amazing, we should worship him. And that's what we get at the end of chapter 2. But then not long afterwards, we see that he's completely defiant to God's revelation. It's like he's had this spiritual experience of the dream and the interpretation, but actually his heart is not changed. And I'm sure you, like me, know people we know who've had a real spiritual experience. Maybe they've been healed, or maybe they just had a real kind of encounter with God, but actually it hasn't really penetrated through to their heart. It hasn't changed them. And a good question for us to ask in the light of this global pandemic is, what will happen once the fear has passed? And obviously we want that to happen. Many people have turned to prayer, the statistics tell us. Many might have been exploring faith in a different way, but once that goes away, where is the true revelation of God to people's hearts, and is it there? And so he organizes this massive festival event. And so he has all these musicians. Always good to see that flute players are mentioned. And gets the whole kind of orchestra together, this parade, and they process. It reminds us, doesn't it, of the spectacles that we've seen when dictators want to make a splash. Red Square, Tiananmen Square. We see these processions with bands and soldiers and just a real show of might and strength, and we get the sort of sense this is what Nebuchadnezzar is trying to do. And he brings every official, everyone from every province in the empire who's rich or influential, who's in a position of power, or management. He brings them there for this occasion. There is no way that anyone is going to miss out that Nebuchadnezzar is top dog and they're going to worship him. And so Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego are pitted against the overwhelming power of Nebuchadnezzar as he calls all his loyal servants to bow down to the image of gold. Verse 7. As soon as the music played, everyone fell down and worshipped the image of gold that King Nebuchadnezzar had set up. Everyone worshipped. You know, most of the time people do what it takes to keep on the good side of a dictator and they go home. It doesn't matter whether you believe it or not. You just are afraid. And so you just do what everyone expects and then you go home. But Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego were not those kind of people, and they remained standing. And it's never fun to be the person who stands out, is it? There's an image, again, I can't show it to you, but you can look it up for yourself. There's an image of a Nazi party rally in 1936. And in the middle of the crowd is one sole protester, and you can imagine all of them are doing the Nazi salute, whatever their hearts are telling them. They're not going to be seen to not be conforming. But in the middle of this image, there's one sole protester, and his arms are crossed like this, and his face is grimacing as he defies orders to pay homage to Hitler. And this man's name was August Landmesser. And he lived from the 24th of May 1910 to the 17th of October 1944, so he didn't quite make it through. He was a worker at a shipyard in Hamburg in Germany, and my dad used to work at a shipyard in Hamburg in Germany. There you go. He became known as the possible identity of this man in this photograph. And he wasn't keen on the Nazi party, mainly because he was having a relationship with a Jewish woman. And eventually he was imprisoned and drafted into military service and was killed. But how brave to be that person. And yes, Ella, isn't it interesting and strange that Daniel isn't noticed or called to account with them? We don't know anything about Daniel in this story. I mean, maybe he was on holiday or something. No, seriously, we don't, do we? And we don't know if it's just a story where he doesn't want to make himself in the center of the story, or we don't know whether for some reason with everybody that was there, he just wasn't called to account. It is strange, isn't it? And I don't know the answer. So they are, the statue is there in the middle of the plain, and then also there is this massive furnace to one side. So yes, there's peer pressure as well, and massive peer pressure. And of course we see the sort of little snide comments of the others, don't we, around them saying, oh, you know, actually they didn't bow down, and snitching on them. But there's actual intimidation as well. So there's this furnace. So it's like, well, you know, this is not a question of just sort of getting a bad mark in your book. This is quite serious. There's actual intimidation. He's not saying you must worship my God only, because the empire was built on a bunch of countries and gods all over the place. I've lost where I am. Here we go. He's basically saying, you know, in private, you can do whatever you want. You can believe whatever truth you want to. You can worship whatever gods you want to. But when you're in public, you need to toe the line and worship my way. Of course, for most people, that wasn't a problem. Most of the people in that generation were polytheists, pagans. They had a whole range of gods to worship. There were gods that corresponded to every aspect of your life, gods of beauty, of work, of war, of nature. And to add another god into the mix was like no big deal. In fact, it may be an advantage to you. I'm just having a little comments here. Hi, Claire. Nice to see you. Yeah, Peter, maybe he was above the other officials and wasn't included, or yeah, maybe they were too scared of him and they didn't think it was worth snitching on him because they thought that it wouldn't go well for them. We don't know, do we? So for everybody else, they could just add in an extra god. But for Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, of course, they were people of one God. And the Shema, which they would say regularly, is, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God is one." And for them, there was no public and private, no secular and sacred. They believed in God, the one God, over every aspect and part of life. And that's like an ongoing challenge, isn't it, for us? We face that challenge. Are we going to conform in public to something that we don't agree with in private? Do we believe in truth and honesty at home, but then when we're in the context of a world that worships other things? I mean, I just loved it yesterday when Joe Biden talked about truth and lies. Truth and lies, it's like old school, isn't it? Not truth and fake truth or whatever else we might like to think about. Truth and lies. And, we believe in those things, but actually we all know, because we're not stupid, that when we're in the marketplace, there's a lot of blurry edges, aren't there? There's a lot of difficult ethical decisions to make. There's a lot of conflict of, really standing up for the truths that we believe at home in the public arena. There are confrontations as a Christian, with a world that believes and worships other things. There are pressure points where we sense that pressure on us, even in our own context, where we're pressured in public to do something, but our faith requires us to do another. And of course, when that's true in our own context here in the UK, actually in many other nations, it's starkly true. And the situation is not far removed from the experience of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And so you have these astrologers coming forward and denouncing the Jews and saying, "King, you've said that everyone must bow down to you, and whoever doesn't is going to be thrown into a blazing furnace. Well, look, there's some Jews over there, Jews that you've set up over the affairs of Babylon, and they're not paying any attention to you at all. And they're not serving your gods, and they're not worshipping the image that you have made." And they're absolutely ready to make Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego pay. And that's what I was saying earlier about the petty rivalries and jealousies and things that creep up whenever people are put into positions of authority. And you can feel that these guys are not pleased that these Jewish young lads have come in and taken this position of power. And then in verse 15, well, actually just a little bit before that, I mean, Nebuchadnezzar is furious, of course, because he's the main deal, isn't he? And people are supposed to worship what he says. But he asks them, and he must have thought that they were just a bit special, because he gives them a second chance. And I'm sure that he wouldn't have done that whole lot. And he spells it out to them. He said, "Look, this is what you need to do, in case you haven't understood properly. You need to worship this statue, but if you don't, you're going to be thrown immediately into a blazing furnace." And then he really challenges them. "Then what God will be able to rescue you from my hand?" And you can just feel at that moment, if there was any measure of doubt in Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego about what they were going to do, at the point where Nebuchadnezzar challenges the God that they worship, you can see that steeliness grow up in them again. And so they face this challenge to conform to the status quo, a challenge to bow down to idols, and then the challenge to trust God through the fire. I'm just having a little quick read. That's great. Thanks for your comments anyway. So it may be that they've tried to not worship the statue kind of quietly without drawing attention to themselves. I mean, it's not right on every occasion, is it, to leap up and down and say, "Look at me not conforming. Look at me taking a different way." Sometimes we just have to do that quietly. And that guy in the picture of the Nazi rally, he was probably just trying to do it quietly, but not conform. And now these three young Hebrews face the threat of death, and they meet that with the most remarkable words, don't they? And I mean, these are some of my favorite verses in the whole of Scripture, I think, really. Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, verse 16, replied to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we do not need to defend ourselves before you in this matter. If we are thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand, O king. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O king, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of gold you have set up. I mean, they are gracious, they are humble, they are respectful to the king, and that character stuff coming through again that we see with Daniel time and again through this book, their character, their godliness, the way they speak to him. But within that is a steeliness, a defiant faith, and then an unconditional trust in God. And if you turn over to Hebrews chapter 11, see if we can find Hebrews. Hebrews chapter 11 and verse 32. I'll just read it rapidly. And what more shall I say? I do not have time to tell about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, Samuel, and the prophets who through faith conquered kingdoms, administered justice, and gained what was promised, who shut the mouths of lions, quenched the fury of the flames, and escaped the edge of the sword, whose weakness was turned to strength, and who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. Women received back their dead, raised to life again. Others were tortured and refused to be released so they might gain a better resurrection. Some faced jeers and floggings, while still others were chained and put in prison. They were stoned, they were sawn in two, they were put to death by the sword. They went about in sheepskins and goatskins, destitute, persecuted, and ill-treated. The world was not worthy of them. They wandered in deserts and mountains and caves and holes in the ground. These were all commended for their faith, yet none of them received what had been promised. God had planned something better for us, so that only together with us would they be made perfect. You know, there's just so few verses to sum up so much, and so much challenge, so much pressure, so much persecution, and even death. And yet, you know, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, along with others, had this unconditional trust in God. Their faith is unshakable. They will not bow. And Nebuchadnezzar, of course, is utterly furious now. He's given them a second chance and they haven't taken that. And he heats up the furnace 7 times hotter. And it probably wasn't the wisest move, really, because actually it harmed his executioners more than the victims. Verse 22, these strongest soldiers died. He should have learned at that point that when the soldiers died and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego seemed unharmed, even at the entrance to the fire, that perhaps something wasn't quite working out how he imagined. And it's very clear, because it says it a few times, that they were tied up. And it's just a little detail, but it communicates something to us. You know, that these guys were being prevented from escape in any form, from helping each other. They were tied up. They were bound. And I just a sense that we need to see how incapacitated, how powerless they were in the face of Nebuchadnezzar and his burning furnace. And 2 things amaze Nebuchadnezzar. First of all, when he looks at them, these men that he's tied up, and we're not talking about a little bit of knitting wool here, they are walking around freely. And it's just this little moment, isn't it, that however much we are bound up, literally or by circumstances, there is a freedom that we have in knowing God and being with him. But they are walking around freely. And how has that happened? And then the second thing that amazes him is that this 4th figure is mysteriously seen alongside them. Verse 24 and 25, his appearance was like the son of the gods. And back to those verses that we read at the beginning, when you pass through the fire, I will be with you. That's what God says to his people. When you pass through the fire, I will be with you. And there's all sorts of ink spilled over this, of course. Is it an angelic being? Nebuchadnezzar seems to think that maybe it is. It would fit with his understanding of the supernatural world. Is it a theophany, an appearance of God in the flames with them? He is with them. Is it an appearance of the pre-incarnate Jesus with them, bearing in mind that God is outside of time in a way that we can't really understand? But whoever it is, we have a sense that God is with them. That's the presence of God is there with them in the flames, and they are unharmed. And he has to acknowledge the supremacy of their God. He's done his best to destroy them, but God has come to stand with them as their defender and companion in the trials, And so he congratulates them for having defied his command. Who'd have ever thought it would have got to that? He ratifies the public worship of their God. Well, as I said earlier on, we can just add another God into the mix, and it doesn't really matter that much, and it potentially doesn't say that much about Nebuchadnezzar. And he promotes them again because they've proved the power of God. What is it that makes such faith possible? Because it's easy to admire Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego and think, well, I could never be like that. But we face our own trials in life, don't we? Maybe it's not being thrown into a fiery furnace, although there are believers across the world for whom that is literally true. But what makes that kind of faith possible? And I think there's just a few things that I think it would be good for us just to talk about tonight, because it's so important. This kind of faith is rooted in who God is. Who God is. And I wonder tonight, what is the aspect of God's character that you most value, or which is most important to you right now? Or an aspect of his character, you can write this in the chat, by the way, an aspect of God's character that you find yourself drawn back to time and time again. Because this kind of faith is rooted in who God is. And if we don't know and experience who he is, and I know because I can see the names on the list that you do know who God is, but that's where our faith needs to be rooted, isn't it? In the person and the character of God. So I'd like you to just jot a few things down in the chat about what it is about God's character that you're rooted back to. Marilyn, faithfulness. I know your favorite song is Great is Thy Faithfulness, isn't it? I haven't been able to sing that recently. Oh, can sing it on our own, of course. The faithfulness of God. I think it's just amazing, isn't it, that he's always there and with us, and constancy. He never changes. It's interesting, isn't it? Some similar things there. Beauty of his creation, his grace, undeserved forgiveness. We've done this before, that where you go through the alphabet and you write down a characteristic of God for every letter of the alphabet. Of course, there's a level of creativity required in one or two places, but you're even just reading what you're writing. You can feel your faith kind of rising in you just as you read what people have written. This is kind of a form of worship, isn't it? Of speaking out the characteristics of God and reminding ourselves who he is. Faithfulness, kindness, grace, provision provides us what we need, companionship, and that underneath his everlasting arms. I mean, there's something incredibly secure about that, isn't there? Feel free to keep writing things. Provision and presence, constant loving presence. Because this faith is rooted in who God is, because it's not our belief or the amount of faith that changes the world, is it? It's who we believe in, who we believe in. And the second part of this that's really important is that this kind of faith is not so much rooted in the power of God, but in his goodness. It's not so much rooted in the power of God, but in his goodness. It's because God can be trusted that I can leave with him the decision to rescue me or not. Let me say that again. It's because God can be trusted that I can leave with him the decision to rescue me or not. You see, the NIV version puts it one way, but other versions sometimes say, if he, God, whom we serve, is able to save us from the blazing furnace and from your power, then he will. It's a little bit more uncertain, and we, of course, like certainty. So we know that our God is able to save us. But actually, truth be told, no one had been through a fiery furnace before. So there may well have been a little bit of uncertainty about what they were saying, and it almost like they get more certain as they're speaking to Nebuchadnezzar. And these exiles are committed to God not primarily because of his power, but because of his goodness. It's because he is good that he can be trusted, even when our circumstances seem to go against us. Reminds me of when Lucy and the other children in Narnia meet with the Beavers, Mr. and Mrs. Beaver, their first experience of being in Narnia. And they say, don't they, to the Beavers, is he tame? And they say back to them, no, of course he's not tame, but he is good. You know, there's something profoundly impacting about trusting that God is good. He is good. And in this text, they are not afraid to acknowledge this ambivalence, because their faith is founded on the fact that God is good, that he can be trusted, and that even in death, they are safer with him than without him. That's incredibly powerful, isn't it? Everything about our lives is to make us safe and secure, particularly here in the developed world. It's about making yourself safe and secure. And these guys say we'd rather be with God in death than without him in life. That's major, isn't it? Such a challenge. See, their faith has no danger of running into positive thinking. They're not sort of staring in the face of reality and saying, oh, it's not really like this. They're totally truthful about reality. If we go in that furnace and God doesn't do anything, then we're going to singe. And they're not betting their faith on a particular outcome. And you know what? I've seen that too many times. Pastorally, it's a nightmare when we bet our faith on a particular outcome. If God does this, then I will trust him. And actually what we trust in is the goodness of God and his love for us that endures forever. And so really kind of continuing, by the way, I'm loving some of the things that you've put on the chat here about the character of God. Providence and love and faithfulness, his word is true. Rob's enjoying his alphabet as X-ray vision, which sees straight through our masks. Yeah, that's right, isn't it? Keeps all his promises. He never sleeps. He's always there. You see, this kind of faith that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego have liberates them to love God for his person and not his performance. And that's really important, isn't it? We are in a performance-driven culture, but this is about loving God for who he is, not for what he does, although of course we love him for what he does. It allows our relationship with him to be undemanding. And actually at times we can be incredibly demanding in our faith. And I think perhaps above all, a sign of maturity as a follower of Jesus is when we are able to trust God, whatever the outcome. And I know that some of you have walked through that in very profound and challenging ways, in recent months even. And actually seeing your heart to trust God, whatever the outcome, is such a challenge to me and profoundly impacting, because it's so undemanding and it demonstrates so much of the relationship that you have with God. And I'm just going to read to you a few words from this book, and because I love the way that he expressed it. He says, God is not a performing pony waiting for me to reward him with apples. He does not need to heal me in order to be God. He has already done enough for me to demonstrate his love. Nothing more is necessary to prove it. I do not come to him to tell him how to save me. Rather, I throw myself on his mercy like a small boat, trusting to the vastness of the sea, like a kite before the urging of the winds. I come to him because he is the source of all goodness, the only unpolluted fountain, the plumb line of all that is true and pure and good. If he rescues me from the fire, so be it. If he asks me to walk through it, so be it. Either way, the story ends the same way. I fall into the bosom of his mercy. I just loved how he put that, because I think it so expresses this story that Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego just threw themselves on the mercy and goodness of God, and they trusted him. And their faith was wide enough and flexible enough to embrace the whole breadth of the experience of God, the familiar and the unfamiliar, the easy and the hard. And this kind of faith does not insist that our circumstances adapt to us. It gives us the strength to adapt to our circumstances and rise above them or walk through them, which always reminds me of that the story of we're going on a bear hunt. Because, it'd be lovely to walk around the challenging things or over them or dig under them. But more often than not, we can't. We have to go through it. And there words from Gerard Kelly, Peter. And we have to walk through things. And yet we have a God who is with us in the adversities and trials of life. And our maturity is in the words of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. If we're thrown into the blazing furnace, the God we serve is able to save us from it, and he will rescue us from your hand. Such trust, confidence in the power of God. But even if he does not, we want you to know, O King, that we will not serve your gods or worship the image of God you have set up. And as I was saying last week, having watched the World Watch List from Open Doors, we have many brothers and sisters who are going through the furnace and are not being saved from the furnace. Some of the stories that were told were simply heartbreaking, but they will not deny their faith in Jesus Christ, because to be with him in death is better than to deny him in life. And that's just super challenging, isn't it? To know that our God is so good and loves us so much that whatever the circumstances of our life, however challenging they may be, he is with us and for us, and his goodness and love endure forever. And I want to finish tonight with, I guess it's a poem. It's like a prayer, like a poem. And Eddie Lyle sent it to me on WhatsApp yesterday. And I thought, oh, this is perfect for tonight. So I want us to use this as a prayer tonight. We all know our own circumstances and the challenges of our own lives right now. Maybe for some of us, we feel like we are in the fiery furnace. And we need to see the one who walks with us and to just know his presence with us. So let's pray with the words of this lovely liturgy. In the midst of whatever follows, O Lord, let me meet your mercies anew and anew and anew. In the midst of my dismay, fix my eyes again and again upon your eternal promises. How this ends, that is up to you. If the next news is favourable, I will praise you for the ongoing gift of life. If tomorrow's tidings are worse still, will I proclaim your goodness, my heart anchored ever more firmly in the eternal joys you have set before me. And when, whether days or decades from now, you finally bid me rise and follow you across the last valley, I will rejoice in your faithfulness even there, especially there, praying thy will be done, and trusting by faith that it will be done, that it is being done, even now. Even in this disquiet, I am utterly yours, O Christ. In the midst of this uncertainty, I abandon myself again to you, the author and the object of all my truest hopes. Amen. Thank you for joining me tonight. I was trying to write 4 talks at once, so if it was a bit chaotic at any point, sorry, forgive me. But there's just so much good stuff in this chapter that we've mostly known since childhood, isn't there? About the way that our faith is stretched in the adversities and challenges of life, and it grows, and our knowledge and experience of the living God, the one who says, even when you walk through the fire, I will be with you, just extends and grows as well, doesn't it, as we walk with him. So God bless you all, and see you again soon. Chapter 4 next week. It's amazing how quickly it goes through, doesn't it? So have a read of the chapter if you want to beforehand. They're pretty long, these chapters, and I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Night, night, everybody.